Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and in Miyirtz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Peches Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on the very bottom line of Pei Zayin Amid Beis, Siman Shin Beis Sif Ches. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanisunim Bar Tzara Bar Shivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayom, Bein Bayabosha, Hamakayim Yerachem Alehem V'Yetziem Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'afelu La'Oiro Mishibud L'Geula, Hashta Bagalo of Izman Kariv and Emar Amen. Our learning should be a schus Refuah Shalema for Rachel Shava Basitel Freda, Moshe Ben Esther Fradel, Yitzchak ben Sion ben Dusha, Tzvi ben Leah Miriam, Chava Hadassah bas Rezel Serel, Devora bas Shasha Bina, and Rivka bas Shira Leah. They should have a refuah shalema b'soich shar chayla Yisrael. Our learning should also be a schus. The Rebbeinu Shalom should look after all of our brothers and sisters who find themselves in harm's way b'chol makom shehem. So we're holding by Sif Ches, but before I move along to Sif Ches, I just want to make a comment about something that we learned in yesterday's shir in Sif Zayin. In Sif Zayin, the Mechaber said a very interesting halacha. The Mechaber said, if you have a muddy stain on your beged, you could take your hands and you could put them inside the beged. Mishav shafai mi bifnim. You could put your hands inside the beged, and then you could rub the fabric together to take off the mud. Now, the Mechaber qualified this at the end of Sif Zayin, and he said that that's when the mud is lach, when it's still moist. If it's dry, said the Mechaber, you could run into a problem of teichen, which is grinding. If it's dry, and now when you rub it, you're going to crumble the cake of mud into crumbs, and it's going to crumble off the fabric, that would potentially be a problem of teichen. So again, the mud is on the outside of the beged. You could put your hands, do this a little better, okay? You could put your hands inside the beged and then fold the beged and do this. But you're not allowed to do it, said the Mechaber. You're not allowed to do it avaloi bachutz. You're not allowed to do it on the outside. So you can't take your hands on the outside of the beged and go ahead and rub it. That you can't do because that, the Mechaber said, that is Dedami limalabein. That's too much like libun. It's merzi kimalabein. It's an issa d'Rabbanan. It's not an issa d'Oraisa. But that we said you're not allowed to do. Is the camera running properly here? It would seem that it is. Yes. Okay. Now that's fine. Later in Sif Zayin, the Mechaber said another halacha. The Mechaber said umegareroi batziporin. You could take your nail and you could take off the mud with your nail. Now again, that's only if it's moist. If it's dry, you can't do that, because again, that would be a teichen shaila. But if it's moist, you could take your nail on the outside of the beged, and you could scratch it off with your nail. So it comes out from Sif Zayin, a very interesting thing. To go ahead and put your hands on the outside of the garment and rub the two sides of the garment together to take the mud off, that you're not allowed to do. But to go ahead and take your nail and scratch the mud off, that you are allowed to do. And to many, this seems very counterintuitive. To do this is mersi kimalabein, but to do this is not mersi kimalabein. But yet, that is what comes out from the Mechaber and the Mishnah Berurah. And I think the explanation of this, you have to say, is because doing this is an act of malabin. This is what you do when you launder a garment. When you launder a garment, nowadays when we launder a garment, we chuck it into the washing machine. But back in the day, when you're doing hand washing, what do? You take the clothing, you take the beged, you put it into a basin with soapy water, and you take it and you rub it together. So this is very much mersi kimalabein. This looks like an act of kvisa. This looks like you're doing laundering. This is not. That's not how you do laundry. So this does not look like malabi. That's how I understand it, and I just wanted to make that little addendum to yesterday's share. Now we can move along to Sif Ches. Very interesting share today. I hope that every day is interesting. Says the Mechaber Sif Ches, and Sif Ches is really a halacha that we have already alluded to and explained previously. Says the Mechaber, Ein megardin, you're not allowed to scrape, says the Ramah here in the parentheses, besakin, using a knife, oy betzipirin, or with your nail, minol, you're not allowed to scrape off dirt off of the shoe using a utensil like a knife or using your nail. Bein chadash, bein yashan, this is true whether the shoe is a new shoe or an old shoe. Why? Because you're going to scrape off a little bit of the leather, the heavy memachik, and this would be the isser of memachik, smoothing something out. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cut lamed zayin at the bottom of Pei Zayin and Beis, ein megardin, you're not allowed to scrape. Afilu hayalav tit the kavanasai lahaseratit, even if it's a davar she'ein miskaven, even if you're doing the scraping not to be memachik the leather, you're not trying to smooth out the leather. All you're doing is trying to take off the mud. So it's a davar she'ein miskaven. Still, you're not allowed to do this, says the Mishnah Berurah, the psik ratio, because this is a psik ratio. What are you doing? You're literally scraping. So yeah, your kavana is to take off the mud, but you are scraping it. There's no way you're going to avoid scraping it. You are scraping it. And therefore, this is aser. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you can't do this with a knife. Even with the relatively dull backside of the blade, you cannot do this. And says the Mishnah Berurah, and we already learned this in the words of the Chavetz Chaim yesterday, therefore, it would be proper to take care that they should make the iron bar that was placed by the door coming into the shul, the boot scraper, where they would take a piece of metal and they would affix it outside the door to the shul. That was the boot scraper. Like we said in yesterday's share, in those days, a doormat was not sufficient. We could use a doormat because we're walking, generally speaking, on paved roads and paved sidewalks. But if you're walking through the muddy fields, a doormat ain't going to do it. So they had a boot scraper. And that was a piece of metal. Says the Chavetz Chaim, you should take care that it should be made of v'rachav. It should be thick and wide. V'loy chod. It should not have a sharp edge. Not even a sharp edge. It shouldn't have an edge. V'ayel el b'sif katan chavav, where we discussed this at length, where the Mishnah Berurah said that you could rub off the boot on the end of the step. Ulekanech b'koisel shari, but to wipe off the shoe against the wall is mutter v'chanal b'sivav, like we learned earlier in Sif Vav. Okay, moving along to Sif Tes. Now, in some ways, I wish that the words that the Mishnah Berurah placed here in Sif Tes, if you take a look at Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Lamed Tes, today's page of Mishnah Berurah is almost completely one Ois Katan of Mishnah Berurah. In a way, I wish the Chavetz Chaim would have placed this Mishnah Berurah at the beginning of the Siman, as a hakdama to the Siman, but b'chachmasai, and with his siyata d'shmaya, he did not. Whatever the reason is, I don't know, not sure. But having said that, it's over here in Ois Katan Lamed Tes, so we'll learn it today. Says the Mechaber in Sif Tes. You know what? I'm not even going to read the Mechaber yet. We're going to go straight into the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Lamed Tes, where the Chavetz Chaim is going to give us Kedarkoi B'Kodesh, a beautiful primer in the Malacha of Melabain, which the word Melabain literally means to whiten. We use the word Melabain, we colloquially, what we say is laundering, washing. That's kind of how we usually say it in English. Now, Melabain is one of the Lamed Tes Malachas. Now, let's remember, where do the Lamed Tes Malachas come from? Which Malachas were Zoiche to be part of the list of the 39? Which Malachas made it to the Lamed Tes Malachas? The answer the Gemara tells us is Malachas that were performed in the Mishkan as part of the building of the Mishkan. So, for instance, Kaisev, writing, is one of the Lamed Tes Malachas. Where did they use writing in the Mishkan? Well, the Gemara tells us that they had to make simanim, they had to write marks on the krushim, on the beams of the Mishkan. They had to write marks to know which beams went where. So Kaisev became one of the Lamed Tes Malachas. Teichen is one of the Lamed Tes Malachas. They had to grind. They had to grind herbs, spices for the ketores. Grinding had to be done in the Mishkan, for the preparation of the Mishkan. So in order to make it to the list, to be one of the Lamites Malachas, it had to be a Malacha that was done and performed in the preparation, the Binyan HaMishkan. That's what became a Malacha. Okay, Malabain. Where was Malabain in the Mishkan? The answer is that we know that in the Mishkan there were Yerios, there were tapestries in the Mishkan. Now, when I say tapestries, I don't mean things that were hung on the wall for beauty. What do I mean when I talk about the Yerios? Well, the Mishkan did not have a proper roof. It didn't have a constructed roof, a roof made out of metal or wood or what have you. The roof of the Mishkan was fabric. It was several layers of fabric. The entrance to the Mishkan proper was a curtain. What closed off the entrance to the Mishkan was a curtain. What separated between the Oil Moed and the Kachei Kachim? Between the front part of the Mishkan, where you had the menorah, the Mizbeach Hazav, and the Shulchan, and the back end of the Mishkan where the Aron HaKodesh was, what separated between the two? A curtain, the Paroiches. What surrounded the Chotzer of the Mishkan, the courtyard outside the Mishkan? Yerios, curtains. What blocked the opening to the Chotzer? More Yerios. So there were a lot of fabric tapestries or curtains in the Mishkan. Now, how do you make those? Well, you weave them out of yarns, very specific yarns, named in the Psukim, Tcheles, Argamon, Teilah, Shani, Sheish. Now, how do you make these yarns? Well, in the case of wool, you take a shepsela, you take a sheep, you have to shear off the wool, and now you need to prepare the wool. You need to turn it into yarn, right? There's a lot of steps that go into taking the wool that was shorn off the animal and going ahead and turning it into yarn that you could then go weave into a fabric. One of the steps is melabain. One of the steps is that when the wool comes off of the animal, it is not white and it is not clean. Now, even if you want to go ahead and you want to dye it, so let's say tchelis, right? This bluish, purplish, turquoise-ish color of tchelis, right? You want to dye it into tchelis, you can't take the unwhitened wool that came straight off the animal and then dye it blue. You're not going to get the proper coloration. So the first thing that you have to do is malabing. You need to whiten it or bleach it. Only then can you go ahead and dye it the proper color. So one of the malachos that had to be done in the Mishkan, in the preparation of the Urios, was malabain. Now, there's a reason I'm telling this to you. When you think of the malacha of malabain in that way, you realize that malabain is not really what we refer to as laundering. When we talk about laundering, we talk about taking a shirt that is a ready-made beged. That's something that has already gone a lot further than wool that was shorn off an animal. Here already you're talking about wool, let's say, or cotton. It was already spun into threads. It was already whitened. It was already woven. It already went through the entire process. It was already turned into a beged. When you bought the beged, it was clean. You wore the beged. The beged became soiled. Now you want to go ahead and you want to wash it from dirt and odor and soil that was introduced into the beged after it already was a beged. Now, this is not the same, right? So just to put it in the perspective of the Mishkan, we're not saying that the malacha of malabain was done in the Mishkan because once a month they took down the Urias and they laundered them. It doesn't say anywhere that the Levium ever laundered them, right? And we know that the clothing that the people wore didn't get dirty because of the Anani HaKavod. I would imagine that the Urias in the Mishkan didn't get soiled either. So we're not talking about taking a already fabricated garment and laundering it. That's not the malacha of malabain that was done in the Mishkan. The malacha of malabain that was done in the Mishkan was a bleaching or a whitening that was done to wool taken off an animal, or flax that was produced from fibers, stalks of flax, in order to turn it into linen. So this malach of malabain was done as a preparatory step before you turned something into a final item, into a garment or to a curtain, into a urea. Now, why am I mentioning this? As a hakdama to the Chavetz Chaim's hakdama. Now, having said this, let's take a look at Mishnah Berurah's Lamed Tes. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Hine, kedei levayer is divrei elu ashnei seifim, in order to properly explain the coming two seifim in the Shulchan Aruch, tzarich lahakdem hakdama ketana. We need a short preface. My preface to the Chavetz Chaim's preface might have been longer than the Chavetz Chaim's preface. Let's take a look at what he says. Vizuhi. This is the preface that we need. Aleph, step number 1. Ha-melabein hu me'avos malachis. Melabein is one of the Lamed Tes malachis. Okay, just explain that. V'libun shayich bein betzemer ubein bepishtan. The malacha of libun, of whitening or bleaching, pertains both to tzemer, wool, ubein bepishtan, to linen, ubechol sha'or minim shedarkod l'hislabein, or any other fabrics that typically you do libun to. V'libun mikre, what is libun? Libun is considered, says the Chavetz Chaim, bechol davar shederech hatzemer v'hapishtan lehislabein al yedei zeh. Any method that was generally employed in order to whiten either linen or wool, that is considered a maisa of malabain. That is the malacha of libun. So you want to know what the malacha of libun is? Well, they would always have to bleach or whiten wool. They would have to do this to pishtan as well. There were different methods that were employed. Whatever methods were generally employed for this purpose, those are considered actions of the av malacha of malabain. And for example, the Mishnah Berurah puts here in the brackets, Umashed noyagin, what they customarily do, shemeniach katichas pishtan la'achar arigasai bechama, where they would take a bolt of a linen cloth after they would weave it. So they would take linen fibers, linen yarn, and they would weave it into a bolt of cloth. Then they would put it outside bechama in the sun, v'zorik alav mayim, and they would spritz water onto the bolt of fabric. So they would weave a bolt of linen fabric, then they would spritz it up with water, and then they would lay it out in the sun, kidei shetislabein, because by doing that, the linen becomes whitened. We know that the sun bleaches things, right? The sun oxidizes and bleaches hair, right? So we know that the sun makes things fade, right? So the sun definitely has a bleaching, oxidizing, if you will. I think most bleaching is due to oxidation. So it has a bleaching effect. Why did they spritz it with water? I believe the reason they spritzed it with water is because if you think about it, when you spritz something with water, every droplet of water that lands on the fabric is actually a magnifying glass, right? A rounded droplet of water has a magnifying effect. That's why, by the way, people are always told, people who are very concerned about how green their lawn is, so they like to water their lawn a lot, right? But if you water your lawn in the sun, you're actually going to kill your lawn. Not going to kill, I don't mean the grass is going to die, but you're going to bleach it because the water lays on the grass and it has a magnifying effect from the sun. It could burn the grass, it could discolor the grass. So over here, it's a marla. You spritz the linen with water, those droplets of water are magnifying glasses, and now it bleaches the linen. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Gam zehu b'chlal malabain. This would be an act of malabain. And now there's a chiddush over here, right? Because you don't think of this. Does this have anything to do with laundering? Right? You wouldn't think of this classically the way we tend to think of malabain. You wouldn't think of this as malabain. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is exactly malabain. This is a method that was done to bleach linen fabric. That is malabain 101, says the Chavetz Chaim. That's mamish the av malacha of malabain. You're employing a method that was typically used in order to whiten linen. Now, continues the Mishnah Berurah, v'shiura. Every malacha has a minimum shear in order for you to be chayiv midaraisa. For you to transgress a iser daraisa of malacha on Shabbos, you have to do a minimal amount. So, for example, carrying, hoitzah, right? There's a minimum amount that you have to carry in order for it to reach the bar of a full-fledged malacha of hoitzah that would be also b'daraisa. It would be also b'darabanan anyway. But to be also b'daraisa, that if you did it b'shayig, you have to bring a karban chatos, you have to do it with a minimum shear. What is the minimum shear of malabain? V'shiure b'chut shu arich arba tvachim. You would have to do malabain on minimally a thread that is at least 4 tvachim long. So approximately 16 inches. So that would be the sheer daraisa of malabain. Okay, so that was point number 1 here in the Chavetz Chaim. He explained to you what the av malacha of malabain is. The av malacha of malabain is to whiten or bleach raw, tzemer, pishtim, any other textile. That's number 1. Beis. Step number 2. Hamechabes begodim. You wash clothing. What we know as laundering, what we call laundering, kibus, right? You wash a garment, not the same as what we spoke about until now. Till now, we were speaking about what was done in the Mishkan. Preparatory bleaching of a fabric, or even the bolt of linen cloth, right? It's not a finished beged. It's a bolt of cloth that is yet to be formed into a beged. As part of the manufacturing process, you go ahead and you bleach it. That's the av malach of malabain. Now we come to kibus, laundering. Hamechabes begodim, laundering a garment, have it tolada, have it toldas malabain. This is a tolda of the av malacha of malabain. This is kibus, which is a tolda. V'chayiv. Now, this is also an issa daraisa, because the toldas are isurei daraisa the same way the avos are. What's the chiluk between toldos and avos? It has to do with how many karbanos chatos you're going to have to bring if you did multiple different malachas b'shoigeg, but they're both also midaraisa. So says the Mishnah Berurah, chayiv. You are chayiv midaraisa if you do the tolda of kibus the same way you would be chayiv if you did the av malacha of malabi. V'chein hasoichaton. Also, wringing out a beged from water is also a tolda of kibus. So schita is also a tolda of kibus. Shahaschita gamkein mitzarchei kibusi. Because wringing out is part of the laundering process. Wringing out serves multiple purposes. One purpose of wringing it out is that the water gets absorbed into the garment, and when you wring it out, the liquid that is exuded or extracted from the garment takes the dirt out of the garment with it. The other purpose of wringing it out is also, it's very nice that you went ahead and you washed the garment. So maybe whatever stains were on the garment are off the garment. But right now the garment is full of dirty water, so it's still dirty. You need to wring it out, push it to get that dirty water out. But whatever it is, schita is part and parcel of kibus. So kibus is a tolda of malabain. Schita is a tolda of malabain because schita is part of kibus. V'hu adin the kibus shaykh ba'oros. Very important for what we're going to learn today. Kibus also applies to hides, to leather. Now that's a chiddush, because when we think about washing, we generally think about absorbent fabrics. The water gets absorbed into the fabric. It takes out the dirt. By leather is not so absorbent. So you think of it more as taking off surface dirt. Is that kibus? Says the Mishnah Berurah, yes. You have a malacha of kibus by leather as well. Now, be very careful of what the Mishnah Berurah says here. V'hu adin de kibus shaykh ba'oros. The malacha, the tolda of kibus, also applies to leather, harakin, soft leather. V'yesh, but there are those that say af percussion, that even by stiff leather you have kibus. What's soft leather? Maybe a soft, the term is escaping me. Hide, I forgot what it's called. When you have a belt that's a pure, straight piece of leather. It's called something hide. It's escaping me. But a leather strap, the ritzuas of your tefillin. The ritzuas of your tefillin, that's oireis harakin. That's soft. You know what's hard? The leather of the bottom on your tefillin. That's hard. Or a belt is soft. A shoe, very often, is hard. So, says the Mishnah Berurah, kibus applies to leather the same way it applies to fabrics. Machloikis, some say it only applies to soft leather, but others say it even applies to stiff leather. However, yesh chiluk bein oreis lebeged. But there is a difference between leather and fabric. The ba'oreis loy mikri kibus ad sheyeh kibus gomer. By leather, what constitutes kibus? Only really washing. What's really washing? You take leather, you put it in water, and then you take it and you agitate it and you rub it together. That's kibus gomer. Says the Mishnah Berurah, when is kibus a toilda? When you do it with leather? When it's kibus gomer. When you really take the leather and you really wash it. Ubebegadim, but by textiles, by fabrics, kaimalon dishriyasan b'mayim zuhi kibusan. So by fabric, you take fabric and you put it into water to soak. That is kibus. So you take a dirty beged, you put it into water to soak it in water. That's kibus daraisa. Shriyasan zui kibusan. Soaking it is already kibus, because when you soak it, the water penetrates the fabric, it gets into the fabric, it loosens up the dirt, and the dirt starts to come off. Not so by leather. Soaking leather, would not constitute kibus daraisa. Kibus daraisa on leather is only a real washing, getting in there and rubbing it hard, rubbing the leather surfaces together in the water. That would be kibus by leather. V'chayiv mishum mechabes, by begadim, by fabrics, you're chayiv for kibus just by soaking it. Loishta begadim levanim, this is true by white garments, for loishta tzvuim, or colored garments. We'll see later why that's a chiddush. Okay, so that was already number 2, point number 2. Now we go to point number 3. Gimel, says the Mishnah Berurah. V'hine, b'had kaimalon d'shriyasan hi kibusan. This statement that we just made, that soaking fabric constitutes the malacha of kibus. Now the Mishnah Berurah is going to qualify that, and he's going to show us that this is actually a machloikis. Now I'm going to show you the ramifications of this machloikis by referring back to a halacha that we learned a long, long time ago. Seems like it. In Siman Shin Aleph, Sif Dalet. That would be on Daf Ayin Zayin Amid Beis. We learned over there, Hayaholich L'Dvar Mitzvah Lahakbil Pnei Rabbi Oy Pnei Misha Gadol Mimenu B'Chachma. If somebody is walking on Shabbos, for what purpose? To go to hear the drasha. He's going to the Daf Yomi Shir by his Rav. So he's going for a Dvar Mitzvah. Said the Mechaber, Yochel Averba, he's allowed to walk into an Amas Hamayim. He's allowed to walk into a stream. Now, Rabbi say, when you walk into a stream, you know what you're doing? You're soaking your pants. You're soaking your socks. So, shtel sich the kasha. The Mishnah Berurah just told us that by fabric, we say shriyasan zuhi kibusan. Soaking it constitutes the malacha daraisa of kibus. If soaking fabric is a iser daraisa of kibus, how could you tell me that when you're walking for a mitzvah, you could walk into a stream? You're soaking your pants. That's an Issa Daraisa. You're soaking your socks. Issa Daraisa. Your shoes, not an Issa Daraisa, because soaking your shoes is not Kibus Daraisa. We'll see if it's a Darabanan. I don't think it's Darabanan either, Lamaisa. Soaking your shoe. But you're certainly not washing your shoe. But what do you do with your pants and with your socks? L'chayre, that's Kibus. So let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says here. So we said that Shriyasan Zui Kibusan. So v'hinei, Bahad the Kaimelon the Shriyasan he kibusan, yesh tees papaiskim. Over here we have different opinions amongst the paiskim. Yesh Imrim, there are those that say, and the Sharatziani brings this down from the Sefer Truma Va'arzarua Va'oid Kama Paiskim. Yesh Imrim, when is this true? That Shriyasan Zui kibusan, the dafka kishiyesh ezer davar lichloch al habeged. That's only if you're dealing with a dirty beged. Hey, if you take a dirty beged and you soak a dirty beged, so soaking it is considered kibus. The hashriya mavra lichloch, because the soaking will lift off the dirt. Avol im ein sham lichloch, but if there's no dirt on the beged, va'afilu hushchar machmas levisha, even if the garment became a little bit blackened because you wore it, but it doesn't have dirt. It's not dirty. It doesn't have dirt on it. Lo mikvi kibus al yidei shriya levad. This man the Amar holds that on a clean beged, or even a beged that's a little bit blackened because you wore it, but it doesn't have dirt, soaking it is not kibus. So now we could understand, according to this man the Amar, we could understand the halacha of Siman Shin Aleph Siv Daled. You would have to say that halacha is only applies to somebody who's wearing clean clothing. If your socks are clean, they're not dirty. If your pants are clean, they're not dirty. Then, even though it would be an issa d'Rabbanan to walk into the stream and soak them, it wouldn't be an issa d'Oraisa because it's not kibus, because it's not dirty. We don't say shriyasan zui kibusan by something that's clean. So okay, over there we could relax the issa d'Rabbanan and we can let you walk through the stream because you're going for a dvar mitzvah. Okay, so again, this first man Yamar says, yes, soaking dirty laundry, dirty fabrics, that's kibus. That's an issa d'Oraisa. But soaking clean fabric, that's not an issa d'Oraisa. Unless you do real kibus, unless you get in there and you're rubbing the garment in the water and you're wringing it out, obviously that's kibus even if it's clean. So that's opinion number one. Opinion number two, this is a Rashbam. The second opinion is more machmir. The second opinion says no, even on a clean garment, soaking it is kibus. Kol zeh dafka imhu derech kibus, but only if the soaking that you're doing is derech kibus. It's a soaking that can accomplish kibus. What does that mean? Avalim hu derech lichloch. But if it's a soaking that's actually going to make the garment more dirty, let's pause there for a second. Shin Aleph Siv Daled. When you walk into the stream, are you going to clean your pants? Are you going to clean your socks? Or your socks and your pants are going to get more dirty? So according to this Mandi Amar, the halacha of Shin Aleph Siv Daled, the reason you're allowed to walk through the stream if you're going to the shear is because that's not kibus. Why? Because it's not derech kibus. It's derech lichloch. And this Mandi Amar says derech lichloch is okay. The Mishnah Berurah over here gives us another ramification. Going for example, Shanat L'Yadav B'Mayim. You go and you wash your hands. It's Shabbos. You're allowed to wash your hands on Shabbos. You go wash your hands. Now your hands are soaking wet. You go to a towel and you want to dry off your hand on a towel. You know what you're doing when you dry off your hands on a towel? You're soaking the towel. Shriyasan zui kibusan. How are you allowed to do that? Kigoin shenat legad b'mayim u'mekancha b'mapeh. Va'afilu im hayu amayim tfuchim harbe al yadav. Even if your hands are soaking wet, va'yidei kinucha hutpach hamapa. And by drying off your hands or your face, you're going to soak the towel. According to this opinion, it wouldn't be a problem of shriyasa hikibusai. Why? The derech lichlechu. Because are you cleaning the towel? No, you're making the towel dirty. So it's not a problem. You're not going to say shriyasa zui kibusan. It's not derech kibus, it's derech lichlech. Okay, so far we had over here two opinions. Again, the rule is 30,000 feet, shriyasan zui kibusan. Soaking fabric is the tolda of malabein. It is a daraisa. However, we're qualifying it. Opinion number one, that's only true if when you soak it, it's dirty. If you soak a clean garment, that can't be kibus. Opinion number two, no, even soaking a clean garment could be kibus. But only if you're soaking it in clean water. Only if you're doing it derech kibus. If you're doing it derech lichloch, that can't be kibus. Next opinion, the yesh machmirin oid. Then there's an opinion that's even more machmir. Shem hayu amayim merubin. This opinion says if you're dealing with a lot of water, so that you're going to get the fabric very wet, afilu kishu derech lichloch, even if it's mamish dirty, amrinon shriyasai hi kibusai. They still hold it's shriyasai hi kibusai. Now, according to this Bandi Amar, what do you do with Shin Aleph Siv Dalet? This Bandi Amar says, I don't care if you're walking into dirty water. Apparently, this Bandi Amar also doesn't care even if the garment is clean. So you're wearing a clean suit and you're walking into dirty water, it still is kibus. So what's with Shin Aleph Siv Dalet? How are we relaxing in Issa Daraisa in order to go to a Daf Yomi shir? So they say that, according to this Bandi Amar, what you have to say is that Shin Aleph Siv Dalet was talking about somebody who's wearing a leather garment. I don't know, leather skirts were in the vogue. I never heard of leather pants for a man, but hey, why not? So, okay, we're not learning Shin Aleph Dalet now. Now we're learning Shin Beis Ches. Okay. Valkein Heim Seivrim, according to this Bandi Amar, what do you do about drying off your soaking wet hands on a towel? Why don't we say, if you're dealing with a lot of water, now this would really have to be a lot of water, Rabbi say. It wouldn't just mean washing your hands. It would mean like washing your hands and holding your palms full of water so that when you wipe your hand on the towel, you're going to soak the towel to the extent that if you touch the towel and then touch something else, you're going to make that second thing wet. We're talking about seriously soaking the towel. Says the Mishnah Berurah, according to this Bandi Amar, Valkein Heim Seivrim, Tikishanoitel Yadav, Veroitzel Anagvan Mamapa. If you wash your hands with a lot of water and now you want to dry off your hands on a towel, according to this Bandi Amar, you have to shake your hands off so that when you go to wipe your hands on the towel, it's not so wet. And now, against this beautiful backdrop of this beautiful Akdama that the Mishnah Berurah gave us, we could understand the upcoming two Seifim of Shulchan Aruch, Sif Tes and Sif Yud. Let's start Sif Tes. And Sif Tes is going to follow very simply the beginning of Sif Tes from what we just learned. So we'll apply the rules that we just learned and we'll understand it right away. Says the Mechaber Sif Tes, Mutter litein mayim al gabe minol l'shachshechai. You're allowed to rinse off your shoe with water. So your shoe, aka leather, so now we're dealing with leather. Your shoe is dirty. You could rinse it off. Rinse it off means take water and pour it over the shoe. Okay, what are you doing? Is this kibus? Well, remember what we learned in bullet point number 1 in the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah said kibus does apply to oros, but only kibus gomer, only real kibus. We don't say shriyasan zuhi kibusan by leather. So over here, what are you doing? This is like shriya. So this is mutter. So mutter litein mayim al gabe minol l'shachshechai. That you're allowed to do. Aval lechabsai, but to wash the shoe. And the Mechaber doesn't take any chances. The Mechaber defines what he means when he says to wash the shoe. Aval lechabsai, to wash the shoe. Dainu shemishavshef tzidoi, turning the page, zeh al zeh, to wash the shoe, which means, says the Mechaber, to use water, get the shoes wet, and then rub the sides of the shoes together. That's kibus gomer. Aval lechabsai, to wash the shoe, dainu shemishavshef tzidoi zeh al zeh, that's aser. And that's an issa daraisa. Why? Because that's kibus gomer. That's really washing. You're using water and you're rubbing the surfaces together, and it's by leather. And the Mishnah Berurah told us you have kibus by you have kibus by leather, if it's real bona fide kibbutz. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut mem. L'shachshechai. Return to Laimar, what the Mechaber wants to say is, Kishayesh on minol ezer dava lichluch. You have some dirt on your shoe. Noisin alav mayim. You could pour water on the shoe. Ad sheyichla halichluch. Until the dirt comes off. V'zen nikrach shikshuch. That's called shikshuch. AKA in English, rinsing. Rinsing the shoe is mutter. But to wash the shoe, Ois cut mem aleph shemeshav shef, to rub the sides of the shoe together, kiderech hamechabsim, in the way of laundering. By the way, it was after I learned this that I decided to open up today's shir the way I did, which was to say that to do this with your beged, that is derech kvisa. The reason that's so chamer is because that's derech kvisa. That's the method of laundering. Scratching off with a nail is not. You see what the Mishnah Berurah says here? Shemishavshech kiderech hamechabsim. When you take the shoes and they're wet and you rub them against each other, that's derech kibbutz. Now, the Chavetz Chaim makes a very interesting diuk in the lashon of the Mechaber. The Mechaber gave us over here two extremes when it comes to the shoe. He said to rinse the shoe off with water, that's mutter. So that's one extreme. It's not kibbutz at all. It's only maybe shriya, soaking. It's just pouring water on it. That's mutter. But the other extreme, to do kibbutz gomer, to go ahead and get the shoes wet and rub them against each other, that's usher, that's an issa daraisa. So he gave us two extremes. But how about the middle? What if I take my shoe and I get it wet and I gently rub it with my hand? So that's like a middle. It's not kibbutz gomer. I'm not taking the two shoes, rubbing them vigorously together. I'm not even taking my hand and vigorously rubbing the dirt off. No, I get the shoe wet and I gently rub it off. What's the din of that? Is that mutter? Is it asur b'drabanan? Is it asur? What is that? Where does that fit in? Let's see how the Mishnah Berurah writes it. Mem aleph. Shemeshavshech kiderech hamechabsim. V'hine miloshen zeh. From the language that the Mechaber chose to use, mashma, the implication is, distam kibbutz, that a lightweight, a simple washing, which the Mefarshim say means to like get it wet and rub it off gently with your hand, afilu isura leka. It sounds like it's not even asur b'drabanan. Again, what's the diak that the Chavetz Chaim is making in the Mishnah Berurah? The Mechaber set the bar very, very high. The Mechaber told us to rinse the shoe off is mutter. Then he doesn't tell us that anything else is asur, not even asur b'drabanan, until he gets to kibbutz gomer. Kibbutz gomer, the Mechaber says, you get the shoes wet, you rub them against each other. That's it, it's a daraisa. So he gave us mutter. Mutter was rinsing the shoe off. He didn't give us any other isurim until he got all the way to the issa daraisa of mamish rubbing the shoes together. So it sounds like anything else is mutter. Even midrabanan it's mutter. So it sounds like to get the shoe wet and wipe it with your hand, gently at least, would be mutter. It wouldn't even be also midrabanan. But says the Mishnah Berurah, "V'ayin b'bir halacha," but take a look at the bir halacha dibra maschal aval lekapsai shebeyarnu, where we explain the mashma midas harbi poiskim, that for most poiskim it is mashma the isura ika afilu b'kibbutz ba'alma, that it would be usher even to do a lightweight washing. Ve'ena mutter rak b'shichshach bavad. The only thing that's mutter is rinsing. Okay. Ach, bekli eitz, but when it comes to something made out of wood, lekuli alma ein by shum chash kibbutz, there's no kibbutz at all on wood. V'ayin mash kesavdul kamei b'sif cotton nun aleph. One more ice cotton here in the Mishnah Berurah, ice cotton membeis, osir. The Mechaber said that to really do a real bona fide kibbutz on the shoes, to get them wet and rub them against each other, he said is osir. Now, we're always very careful in the different lashonos that are used to describe when something mutter means mutter legamri. Potter, you're exempt, means potter aval asur. It's your potter if you do it. You wouldn't have to bring a carbon chatos if you did it b'shoigig, but it's asur b'drabanan, right? Usually when we're talking about a daraisa, we say chayiv. If you do it, you're chayiv. What does chayiv mean? If you did it b'shoigig, you would have to bring a chatos. If you did it chas v'chalila b'mezid with edim and hasra, it would be a chiv misa. So usually by a daraisa we say chayiv. Over here, the Mechaber said that to do this kibbutz, where you rub it against each other, aser. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut members, aser v'chiyuv anamiyika. This is not just aser, this is chayiv. This is an issa daraisa. The kibbutz shayich af ba'oros. Because like the Mishnah Berurah told us in his beautiful Akdama, the malacha of kibbutz applies to leather as well. And this is bona fide kibbutz, so this would be an isser de'oraisa. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. The schus of Limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Baruch Shem should send Yeshuas, Refuas, Parnaset, Sheduchim to all those in need. We should be zoichet to see the BS Goel Tzedek, B'mher of Yamein, Amen. Be well.